So let's look, therefore, at an example. And the example we're going to look at is one that is related to the idea of perhaps a police authority trying to plan a new initiative against drug dealers in a slum area. This is based on three different areas of work, two of which are published. One was Chicago, one is City of God, it's outside Rio, and some of the third part of it is my own experience in Longsight, where one of my postgraduate students did work on ideas about how to sort of like overcome some of the local problems with that. And effectively, what we're going to do is look at the idea of though there are various groups going to plot onto a matrix: local politicians, local residents, gang members, local businesses, rank and file police, taxpayers, national politicians, national businesses. Not an exhaustive list, it's just examples, it's just ideas that come from some of the things that we've looked at. That, and you may well think that. And it's also very arguable. And one of the interesting things we'll look at is the debate over, for instance, the position of rank and file police, who in many ways may be seen powerless, but actually, under certain circumstances, they may see appear to be more powerful. And then we have to decide how we're going to deal with that. And we also have to be honest in assessing things. It's very, very easy and too much obvious. And sometimes I find it's very difficult with students who will argue that certain say, oh, national politicians are very powerful. Of course, they're interested in drug initiatives. Well, the reality is on a day-to-day basis, some are more than that, they're not, especially if something's controversial. The last thing they want to do is be drawn into it. So let's go and have a look at this matrix and look at some of the things that are part of the matrix. The ones we looked at were control of media, place in the hierarchy, control of resources, voting power, payment of taxes, grassroots contacts, role in implementing policy, these sort of things. You can obviously see, for instance, control of the media, local politicians have small amounts of control, national businesses, national politicians often have big media presence, and people like taxpayers, rank and file policemen, local businesses, gang members, and local residents, very low. Place in the hierarchy, very similar, only local businesses will tend to get a little bit of a boost in that area. Control of resources, again, very similar. Local businesses again get a little bit of boost. Maybe local politicians often have a higher power and control of resources because they're often rooted for them. So maybe the general big picture about the national politicians send it, but it's the local politicians who make decisions spending it. Voting power, again, the ones who actually can elect in, pushing the power there to actually make decisions. Taxpayers, national politicians are the ones who have the power here. Payment of taxes, obviously taxpayers are the ones who are paying them. Higher. National businesses, of course, these days to a greater or lesser extent, some of those businesses are actually cutting themselves out from that by not actually paying taxes to a great extent. Grassroots contacts, it starts to move a little bit. Rank and file police may have power there, gang members may have power there, local politicians may have power there. Obviously, national politicians, national businesses, taxpayers, not so much. And the role in implementing policy. Now, this is something quite controversial because rank and file police, many debates will say actually they're not that powerful, but they do if you depends on the way you look at it. And this is one of the keys about stakeholder analysis. You have to look at the point of view you're coming from. Rank and file police may not have much power when it comes to deciding policy, but quite a lot of the time, the way they implement policy on the ground will be a great effect on them. And this is one of the principles that comes around with a strategic corporal. The idea is that you can have a system that is mostly to work in a certain way, but if your junior officers on the ground are not willing to implement that, they can quickly derail the policies. And which is why, although rank and file police on a lot of the counts have very low power, the fact they're at the cutting edge of implementing many of these policies mean that in many cases, if you take a police-led role, if you take a law and order-led role in the enforcement and change of drug things, you will have high power police. Again, if you don't take a law enforcement-led role, then you will have lower power police. But for the rest of this example, I'm going to tend to say that we're taking a much more law enforcement-led thing. So high power for police, high power for national politicians and national businesses. Medium power for local business, local politicians, low power local residents, gang members, taxpayers. So where then does this lead us on the second part of the matrix with the interest? Well, this is something that's very, very important because, again, the mistake is often made that actually high power people should have an interest, and therefore, the Prime Minister should have an interest, the President should have an interest. Well, in reality is how much do they have an interest and how often do you want them to have an interest? There are clearly going to be cases when you don't want them to have an interest. That's the very point about the low interest, high power. You say keep satisfied. Sometimes you keep them satisfied because you don't want them, if they become unsatisfied, become more interested. So obvious high power characters, high interest characters, local politicians, local residents, gang members, local businesses. And like I said, rank and file police, the ones on the ground, would take the risk, so they have it. But taxpayers, well, when we say interest, as long as things are being dealt with, things are going steadily, as long as things under control, they're likely to have less interest. National businesses generally don't want to have an interest. They want the thing pushed aside. They want it dealt with at a local level. They want to be kept satisfied. So they are high power, low interest. And controversially, the same is very true of national politicians. And if you look at the behaviour of national politicians around controversial subjects, it quite often is a case of them really not wanting to get that involved, not wanting to know about it, not wanting to be the individual who is responsible for it. So this is all very important and all very interesting as we go forward. But what does it actually mean? So let's actually, now that we've got them, let's plot them onto the matrix. We start off with local politicians, yes, medium power, higher level of interest. Then we look at local residents. We look at their sort of handling high power, low power, high interest. Go on there. We sort of look at this. We have gang members, again, high interest but low power. Local businesses, they have a bit more power but high interest. Now, the rank and file police is one of the ones that are controversial. If we looked at it from the point of implementing a policing-led solution, a law and order-led solution, actually the rank and file police may be a lot more powerful than you may at first take interest in that. Because if you cannot bring them on board, you cannot get them to get involved, then you will not be able to succeed. On the other levels, we have the taxpayers. The taxpayers, to a certain extent, they do have low levels of power on a day-to-day basis and the low levels of interest on a day-to-day basis. Then maybe this is the way we want to keep them. Maybe we actually want to undo the levels of power that they have. And actually say, the last thing we need is a lot of taxpayer-led complaints, because this becomes very difficult to run some things. And there's certainly in the Western world, there's been this general movement, these taxpayer alliances, taxpayer-led complaints, taxpayer-led organizations can be very difficult. And if you're actually trying to achieve something, they can be the last people you need to get involved. And equally, talking about national businesses and national politicians, you need their support. You need their support to get things done. You need to get their support from the organism. But the reality of the matter is that on a day-to-day basis, you probably don't want their involvement. You want them to let you get on with the job rather than be looking over your shoulders all the time. So how do you actually fulfill those roles then? Having decided where each of them stand, what would you do? Well, with the local politicians, we suggest that the solution is to hold regular briefings, to let them know what's going on, to have meetings. So they basically say, yes, so you're going to keep them informed. With local residents, can you afford to ignore them? Well, to a certain extent, maybe you should ignore them. But equally, if you have a certain policy that you think it could be successful and you can get local residents on side, maybe rather than ignoring them, what you actually need to do is mobilize them. You have to say, well, you are low power at the moment, but maybe if you are acting collectively, you can become quite powerful. An example of this is the police have said that many of the areas, for instance, where stop and search with young black kids is a problem or is common. Actually, some of the people who most want that to take place are mothers of young black children. They're worried about their kids carrying knives. They'd rather they got a short sentence for possession of a knife than longer sentence for use of a knife, or were killed at some point. So actually, and the police have found it quite useful sometimes to mobilise these women into pressure groups. And these are not women who are usually pushed around, so this is not something that's been done particularly cynical. So actually, that is one way in which you could start to think, well, actually, no, these local residents, we don't want to ignore them. Let's get them more mobilised, get them more linked together to be powerful. Gang members, again, these fall just high interest, low power. So what are you going to do? You're going to keep informed. Well, actually, yeah, warning notice, officer amnesty. One thing that was quite successful in Longsight, brought on a lot of complaints, but actually did have an effect, was they used to send people birthday cards. So this is the police. We know when your birthday is. They used to send people Christmas cards. Happy Christmas. We're watching you. We know when you're being naughty. This sounds ridiculous. And sometimes offers of amnesty, etc. So you're using this idea of keeping them informed because they're high interest and low power to try and push them up, perhaps in new directions. Local businesses, again, to keep police meetings, keep things chopping over. What do you with rank and file police? Well, actually, you see them as being the people you want to implement your policy, and you think they could actually potentially have high power if they don't do that, then maybe what you need to do is train them. Maybe you need to finance them. Maybe you need to give them better facilities, etc. So in some cases, there has been a tendency in these areas to throw resources at the police and look what they're looking for. Taxpayers, again, these are ones that more like you want to ignore, to a sense that you don't want to do things that bring them their attention. What about national businesses? Well, you're trying to keep them satisfied. Well, one thing they don't want is they don't want bad news in the public eye. So this is one of the areas you start to control the flow of information. Make sure that national businesses aren't, say, because these people might be affected by tourists not going. For instance, if you talk about Rio, the last thing they want is lots and lots of crime in the public areas. Stop tourists going, businesses suffer. They're talking about national businesses that might be a long way away from the local areas, but even so, they might be worried about crime spreading out. So actually, what they really want to hear is nothing. They want to hear that nothing's happening. They want silence is golden, etc. National politicians, you need to keep up a front that allows them to appear to show an interest. Let them come along occasionally, shake hands, walk around, put on a stab vest, look the business, have a few photo opportunities. That is actually what's going on a lot of the time. You see these. It's not so much about showing an interest as allowing them to be kept satisfied. By keeping them satisfied, you are stopping them from interfering. You're stopping them from having too much interest. So, having said all these different roles, etc., how do you feel them? What adjustments might you want to make? All stakeholders are not equal. Some are irrelevant to the issues at hand, and there's a tendency in the stakeholders now to include everyone who's vague interested. So, who might you dump? Well, an obvious one for you might dump actually is gang members. You might include them when actually there's a crime sense going on, but a lot of the time you might actually prefer that you can just ignore. They might not have any involvement in them at all. And what tends to happen is every so often, if there's been a rise in crime, or as has happened recently in the long site where some people have come out of prison and they're scared of crime kicking off again, there's a tendency just to lean on them a little bit, let them know what's going on, let them know they're being watched, etc. And who else might change? There'll be occasions when you'll want national politicians and businesses to become more interested, when it'll become important to you that they show an interest, that they get involved, and that because you'll be trying to push it forward a little bit. And of course, the other group I've already mentioned, local residents. If you really feel that you have a plan that can improve their lives and improve their societies, you may need them on board. Do that. So effectively, then this brings us up to a new. And so what we're effectively looking to do is we're looking to say move taxpayers perhaps into areas where they might have a higher level of interest. If you're trying to actually persuade them that there would be, if you want them to actually start to put pressure on the politicians, you might be looking to move local residents from low interest, low power to high interest, high power, depending on how they've sort of related at the beginning, depending on whether or not sometimes they start off with higher levels of interest anyway. Depending on interest, of course, can be defeatism. They can be say low. If local residents feel they can do nothing about it, they might actually have very low interest. And this is a problem actually in some of these areas, specifically dealing with this issue, where people are saying, look, I can't do anything about it. There's no point worrying about it. That can be a sign of low interest. Therefore, you're trying to develop them an interest, show that something can be done, and then mobilize them as a collective to actually get things done. And temporarily, like I said, probably not permanently, there may be times you need to get politicians and national businesses involved in order to get support and the resources you need to solve it. So this is the complexities, for instance, of stakeholder planning in the public sector. And this is why I've always said it is a very powerful thing, and I hope you can use it effectively. But you have to be able to be honest about the people that you're dealing with. You have to be honest about what you want from them, and you have to be honest about their own levels of political things. If you just take it as at first face value and a politician says they are interested, then I'm afraid you'll probably find it will not be a great achievement in the way that you do things.